Pac-12 player demands. My response next at the Voice of College Football. Play or no play, we talk college football here each and every day at the Voice of College Football, MarkRogersTV. Whether you agree with me or not, if you support the channel, like what we do, please hit the like button. Also, comment below. Of course, we are always looking for your feedback, your recommendations, your suggestions, and your opinion on the topic at hand. And also, of course, share those videos out on social media. Not everyone knows that we're here, and college football fans need to know that the Voice of College Football is right here. When you subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications. That way you know when we're going live. Last week, Pac-12 football players released a document that they had submitted to Pac-12 Commissioner Larry Scott outlining their demands for participation in athletics going forward. Hashtag We Are United. Let's run them down. And here's my initial response, knowing that I don't know all the details. I've looked at this from a number of angles and looked at a number of articles outlining the demands and giving them some sort of context. But basically, on a number of these bullet points, we don't have any context, specifics, details, or explanation. So this is my response. Certainly, if you've got further information, leave it down in the comment section below. The opening statement, quote, NCAA sports exploit college athletes physically, economically, academically, end quote. And then there's a phrase included that includes the disproportionate exploitation of black athletes. Black athletes are represented differently in different sports. Swimming, big sport in the Pac-12. Baseball, big sport in the Pac-12. Others as well. Volleyball. I think the black participation for those sports is very low. Of course, in basketball, it's extremely high. I believe it's the highest of any of the sports. And then football would be rather high as well. I know that it's 70% at the NFL level. All you have to do is compare what you see on a Saturday watching college football versus the NFL on Sunday, and you know that it's much lower at the collegiate ranks. Higher in the Power 5, those are most of the players that move on to the NFL, of course. So I don't know if they're speaking to disproportionate because the black athletes are overrepresented population-wise within the community of athletes in the Pac-12, or that these violations physically, economically, and academically affect the black athlete more, or maybe they mean both. So in terms of physical exploitation, these athletes need to understand that there have been a number of safeguards and guidelines put in place that have limited practice, limited workout time, limited physical practice for the football players. And of course, we're focusing on football here, that did not exist for the past 50 years. So there have been substantial measures taken to protect the athlete, to keep them safe as possible. Football is a collision sport. You still have to practice tackling, blocking, hitting. That's the nature of the game. So it has to be practiced, but there have been severe limitations and restrictions placed on the amount of workout time, practice time. Two-a-days are a thing of the past to the most part. And again, physical practices have been limited significantly over what has transpired in college football and the NFL over the past 5 or 6 decades. Economically, are they being exploited? So college football is a huge business, $1 billion business. Obviously, the revenue is different per conference. It's different to a certain extent per school, but generally the conferences share the money. So even the less popular teams, less successful teams and programs in particular conferences have near the same revenue because most of it's shared in regards to television and others, which of course television is the main revenue source for college football. So maybe going forward, if players are extended a share of the revenue, they will take that into consideration of where they commit and sign to play to a particular program. The Big Ten is reporting that it makes more money than anybody else. I believe I shouldn't say that the Big Ten does. They did not make that report. It's been reported by credible sources that the most recent college football season, that the Big Ten is number one, the SEC number two, and then it drifts down from there. I reported the numbers a few weeks ago. So economically, I would say, again, it depends also on how much that scholarship equals tuition at that particular school. A scholarship tuition at Stanford is worth more than it is just about anywhere else in the country. And maybe the student athlete should take that into consideration as well. So let's make one point very clear when people support student athletes being paid. And we're talking football first and foremost. It's the biggest generator of revenue among the sports by far. The athletes are being paid. They are being compensated. For those of us who paid for our own college, we can certainly relate to that statement. The athletes are being paid. Are they being paid enough? Okay, that we can discuss. Are they being paid enough? They are being paid somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 a year, I would say, based on the typical tuition of one of these major universities. So they're being paid $30,000 to $50,000 a year. Now, based on the time and effort that they put into it, and also in this economic system, which is capitalism, even though it's being eroded and being challenged, capitalism still exists here in the United States. That their biggest claim is the revenue that they generate, which is enormous. And again, it depends on the conference. So at a time in which these players are paid beyond their tuition, the conferences like the Big Ten and the SEC that bring in more revenue would want to have that be known to the athletes that they're recruiting because they're going to make more money. So economically, are they being exploited? I think that they're being highly compensated with the tuition, but I also look at the practicality of the situation. They put in enormous time, and I will get to that point at the end of the video in regards to what is a main source of this issue overall in regards to the investment of the athlete and the payback that they are receiving. This can be to a large extent, this can be resolved by going back in time. All right, I'll get to that in just a second. The major issue here is a large portion of these athletes come from impoverished backgrounds and family experiences. And even if it's not an impoverished situation, if they don't have a lot of money, then they can't send their kids to school, those particular families, and give them enough money to just live life. And so that needs to be addressed. There's no question about that. These athletes are working more than a full-time job. They're being exploited academically. That I don't necessarily understand, because the one major point in all of this is that they're receiving an education for free. And that is a valuable, valuable commodity in this country. An education at a major institution for free. So I don't know how they're being compromised academically. Now, their point may be, and I'm conjecturing, that their ability and their access to the education, especially during the season, but because of the demands of the sport, is compromised. Maybe that's what they're alluding to, and I could possibly buy that. Because the schedule that's given these athletes, and again, we're talking football first and foremost, is ridiculous. Okay, let's get to the COVID concerns. These are the COVID-related concerns for the Pac-12 We Are United group. That they have been asked to sign documents that could, in quotes, serve as liability waivers. I don't know how many institutions have done this. I know that Ohio State, I believe, was the first to have their players acknowledge. And so it was basically an acknowledgement. It was not basically saying that we're signing a waiver, therefore all liability we are disclaiming and understanding that there is no liability involved. No, just to say we acknowledge the risk. So that's a legal issue. I am not qualified to run through who would be at fault, who would be liable in this situation, but it's my understanding that institutions like Ohio State basically just wanted the players to acknowledge that they can't be completely 100% guaranteed that they will not extract COVID. Okay. Point number 2 is that they want the ability to opt out. That already exists. That's already been exercised by a number of players across the country without penalty. So the universities and the football programs have already made that known to the athletes that they can opt out with no penalty. They retain their scholarship. They retain their eligibility. Done. Player-approved health and safety standards with a third party reviewing and enforcing those guidelines. Okay. That's a loaded deal right there. We don't know what that entails or involves necessarily. Of course, the individual conferences, the individual institutions and programs, since back in March, in April, at the time that they shut down the practices, spring practice, they were saying right then and there, we are enacting guidelines and health and safety standards. If they're taking players off the field and saying, go home, we're not practicing anymore, we're not participating in football activities, that was the first and foremost safety standard. So ever since then, they have been reviewing the situation, the numbers, the testing, all of that. And based on my knowledge of what I've read and reviewed and the conversations I've had with people that know, I think the health and safety standards are pretty high. Again, each program's different. Each conference, more so than anything, is different. And we heard rumblings out of Colorado State. I've not looked into that situation that seem rather severe in regards to health and safety standards possibly being written and addressed to the team, but not exercised, not executed, and the health and safety and the care for the athlete not present. Okay. So when you say player-approved health and safety standards, whether those go beyond what has already been implemented by the individual programs and conferences, I don't know what those are. Sports-related medical expenses. This would have to be, again, explained to me because I'm under the assumption, and I could be wrong here, that if, again, we're dealing with football, a football player is injured during football activities, I would think that this would have been a controversial point going back for decades if their medical expenses were not addressed by the university. So I don't know what they're dealing with right here and what they're addressing, because I've got to think that this would have been an issue a long, long time ago with all the injuries in football if those medical expenses were not taken care of by the institution. Next point, distribute 50% of revenue to athletes. I don't know what the current structure is in the major sports on the professional level. And I'm guessing the football players only want this distributed to them. They are creating the revenue, the basketball players to a lesser extent, and then baseball depending on the program, the school. But again, we're dealing with football. And in terms of revenue, we are dealing with football. So they want 50% of the revenue. I would have to do the math. I would have to go to sources to see, for example, this is the Pac-12. How much money does the Pac-12 generate? How much of that is per team? So if the entire conference, I'm just throwing out a number that is not accurate, $100 million in revenue, you divide that by 12. So then you've got about $8.5 million per program, and then you distribute that among 105 football players. Or is there a distinction given to scholarship athletes, to non-scholarship athletes? Is there a distinction given to starters versus non-starters? Do we start to have to determine a pay scale based on your effectiveness, based on your ability, based on your production on the field? That would become sketchy beyond belief. So 50%, I don't know if that's unreasonable. It sounds extremely unreasonable, but I'm not going to state that because I haven't crunched the numbers. I would think that if you're suddenly taking 50% revenue from the Pac-12, that would severely cripple the league. Just a guess. 50%. If you want to take away 50% of my revenue, I'm going to have to make some budget cuts around the household here. Okay, next point. 6-year athletic scholarships. I don't know if this is to address the issue academically that they can't often graduate in 4 years. And I also don't know if the athletes are stating that they will be able to participate in sports for 6 years. So are they just wanting to be eligible to play sports for 4 years and then stay in school for 2 more years under scholarship to graduate? Or are they going to participate in that sport for the entirety of the 6 years that it takes them to graduate? I'd like to know that. Next point. One-time transfer impunity. Once a student athlete decides to go to a particular school and they have all the time in the world to make this decision and they go on visits to the school, they have more information accessible to them and more conversations because of social media and online services and the internet than at any point in history, that they would be making an informed decision at that point. For a long time, it's been a point of contention that coaches leave their teams and then the players are stuck in that particular program with a coach and a coaching staff that they did not commit to. And I certainly understand the rule change, and it was a good one. It was a positive rule change to say if the coach leaves, then there is transfer access for the player. This is asking to be able to transfer without penalty one time regardless. I don't necessarily have an issue with that. One time, necessarily have an issue with that. The general public is able to transfer as many times as they would like to different universities. I have no issue with that on the surface. Again, I'm taking these on the surface at verbatim without knowing the specific details underlying. All right, then we've got the conference will not be able to compete in NCAA championships. Well, okay, I am tying that statement to the distribute 50% of the revenue. So suddenly the Pac-12 cannot participate in the Rose Bowl, or maybe that's not a championship game. There would have to be a distinction made there between postseason play and championship play. But the NCAA championship in basketball, gone. The women's championship, gone. And the college football playoff, gone. And I don't know about postseason play otherwise, because if you take away the bowls, especially the Rose Bowl, and take away the college football playoff from the Pac-12, then that revenue, that 50% of the revenue that the players want, that revenue is going to plummet. Okay, I found this last comment concerning the COVID portion of this to be interesting, that the players want to ensure safety. Okay, nothing's assured in life. I could step outside and get hit by a Mack truck. That can't be guaranteed. Safety cannot be guaranteed. They are playing a sport. It's almost ironic and laughable when you think about the sport that they're playing, and then they want safety insured. Okay, that doesn't exist. Sorry, guys. All right, let's get on to the civic portion of this. Bullet point number 1, And I'm not going to have a whole lot to say here because some of these terms and these recommendations and demands are vague to me. Civic Engagement Task Force to address social injustice. And I put about 18 question marks after that. I would have so much to ask concerning what that all means. Okay. Addressing social injustice. Wow. You want to get me started on social injustice? I've got a lot of social injustice to address that a number of people don't seem to be caring about out there. We could be addressing all sorts of things like child pornography and sex trafficking. We could do that. Anyway, that could be a great thing. That could be a divisive thing. It all depends on how it's organized and how it's implemented. Okay, point number 2, Annual Black College Athlete Summit. What I'm not understanding is segregation versus desegregation. And I'm speaking to my black friends out there, both my personal friends and just viewers of the show that I consider friends because you've supported my channel, because I'm asking this in all sincerity, whether you want segregation or desegregation. So segregation would be that we set up, let's say, a fund for anybody to be eligible that meets the requirements of that particular grant or fund or service. Because you don't meet a certain economic level, for example. Let's say your grades and your SAT scores hit this level and you just don't have the economic ability to go to school, for example. Therefore, we help you out. We recognize this person's of value. They want an education. They desire an education. They've done everything that they possibly can in earning an education opportunity at the next level, but they just don't have the means. Therefore, we're going to give it to them, not based on what they look like, what their gender is, what their political affiliation is, what their religion is. No, we're doing it because they're a valuable person. They're working hard, but they don't have the means to go to school. I just don't understand why that has to be a black, white, or race issue. I don't know that we have to have the Asian such and such fund, the black such and such fund. Would we have the white such and such fund? 2% revenue financial aid for low-income black students, community initiatives, development programs. Okay, I understand this is already happening, and I think this is pretty much common across the board in regards to institutions providing revenue and financial aid to black students in particular, but low-income students. And again, I would like to know why we need to have the distinction. So if, for example, there are 100 students in question and 98 of them turn out to be black just because of the conditions, not because of their skin color, then I would think whether it's 98 blacks or 55 blacks or whatever the racial distribution, it should go toward the students who have earned it based on their test scores, based on their work in high school, and then also don't meet the requirements and have shown to be unable financially to go to college. We should be helping those individuals across the board. I think that's it. All right. So what would correct a lot of these issues is basically we have become in college football and college athletics, but football in particular, a sports league, a professional sports league. So we treat these athletes as professionals, and much of it's to their benefit. They have the best training facilities. They have the best nutrition available to them, tremendous food options, housing, lodging, travel, etc. So it's not all a drain on them. Some of it's to their benefit, but most of it is to their detriment because they are being drained in terms of time, effort, drained physically, mentally, emotionally, because they're treated as professionals. Therefore, there's really no off season. The off season is much like you would see an NFL player in regards to what they're expected to do with individual workouts, with team workouts, with film study. All these things put together make it a grind for these athletes. We need to go back in time. I heard it explained by former Big Ten Commissioner Jim Delaney as a varsity basketball player at North Carolina in the late 60s, and these were top-notch, top-caliber North Carolina teams that reached Final Fours. So we're talking about in that current day of the late 60s, the highest of athletic competition. He compared the demands on the collegiate athlete then versus now, and it's not even close. We need to stop treating these student athletes like professionals. They are not professionals. Let's give them days off. Let's give them weeks off. Let's give them an off season. Are they going to be less prepared for the NFL? Probably. Too bad. Our NFL quality play is going to drop that much, but the NFL still has to go to the same source to draw the players. What happened was there were certain standards of conduct and culture and approach back in, let's say, the 1960s. But this program over here in this conference wanted to get ahead, so they pushed their athletes just a couple more hours per week. So then they passed legislation to say, oh, we can practice them 15 hours a week instead of 12 hours a week. Or now we're going to demand this of them or that of them. And we're going to extend the season from 9 games to 10, then 11, then 12. Oh, we're going to tack on a couple special games for certain teams onto 13 games. Hawaii came nothing close to a college football playoff appearance this past season, and Hawaii played 15 games. Maybe we draw this back to a 10-game season, 11-game season. We give these student athletes an off season. We treat them like students. We still take football very seriously. They may need to understand that the workout facilities aren't going to be quite as pristine and elaborate as they are now, but they still have very functional, state-of-the-art weight equipment and nutrition, but it's not all draped in gold. That might be what we need to do. Is that going to happen? Absolutely not. It's not going to happen. Should it happen? Probably. Demand less of the athlete, and with that, they're going to be treated with more respect. They're going to be given less luxury, but treated with more respect than they currently are. My thoughts on Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please leave your comments below. And, of course, hit that like button and subscribe. That way you know when we're going live. We'll see you next time.